Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Top Cyber Pro podcast. I'm CEO and founder of TopCyberPro.com, Jim West. I have a wonderful guest today that's going to be talking about some really cool and interesting topics in terms that you probably heard about, but we're going to get kind of a little bit deeper into the pool under the surface of what that means. But without further ado, I have Jimmy Wylie, who is a distinguished malware analyst. And I'm sure there's some other titles and accolades, Jimmy, but could you kind of take us through really quickly what is a malware analyst?
Yeah, malware analysis is a subset of reverse engineering. It's basically studying malicious software, taking it apart, figuring out how it operates, what effects it has in the systems, and then once you sort of have that kind of map of functionality, usually you try to help design some kind of defenses. Sometimes that's a signature. Other times it could just be maybe higher level configuration things you can do to stop the stuff. But generally that's what it is. It's examining malicious code and explaining to everybody else how that malicious code works.
So I already have a question because right off the bat you mentioned another term that people like may have heard of it, but you said reverse engineering. I mean, we heard of engineering. Engineers build things, they make, they build things, right? So what is
Mhm.
reverse engineering?
Yeah, so reverse engineering is a larger domain. So I guess when it comes to malware analysis, technically malware analysis is a subset of software reverse engineering because we're looking at code. But reverse engineering is can take like many forms. Like maybe some of the original stuff would be like hardware reverse engineering, or maybe more like machine reverse engineering. You hear in the news about like a downed drone, over some border or whatever, right? Well, like militaries can grab that drone and like take it apart and try to figure out how it works, right? And so we've had things like reverse engineering happen for centuries, right? Anytime, you can think about archaeology discovering a new tool, trying to figure out how it works. That's a form of reverse engineering. But when it comes to what I'm doing specifically, it's just looking at software and looking at code, and that could be at any level. So when you have compile code, that could be looking at the assembly instructions, which are like teeny tiny instructions. I mean, very basic operations, or it could be decompiling something written in Python and looking like just at the source code and telling people how it works.
hmm So, when you mention that, it reminds me of like a lot of folks that are in IT or tech will talk about when they were a kid, or most people in general, like taking apart the toaster to see how it works to see if we can put it back together. So it sounds like reverse engineer is a lot like taking things apart and seeing if you can make it work again, right? Or
Oh,
figuring out how it works.
absolutely. That's 100%. Well, that's all reverse engineering or like, putting together your Lego set and then putting away the instructions and taking it apart and trying to get it back together again or, all of these things. Anything where you're sort of deconstructing, you know, and then deconstructing and forming kind of a mental map of what that deconstruction means is kind of basically reverse engineering. Sometimes you have to deconstruct it so that you can replicate it. Sometimes you don't. Even with malware, there are instances of reverse engineering so that you can, for example, reverse engineering malware communication so that you could stand up your own command and control server to control the malware, right? A little bit lighter, I think, but I think Marcus Hutchins became famous with that one piece of malware for reverse engineering it and then, finding the domain and then shutting off. Why can't I remember the name of that malware right now? It's so
WannaCry?
famous and it's escaping me. WannaCry, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and so that level of knowledge came from reverse engineering the malware somewhat. But you can get more complicated where you could communicate with the malware. You can do all kinds of things. Generally, though, we're not trying to replicate the malware functionality that way. So we're just deconstructing so that we understand kind of how it operates and what the threat is, what its capabilities, who it's going to affect. And then sometimes when you get into the threat hunting and sort of the cybersecurity intelligence areas, it's sometimes you're pulling details to maybe identify what kind of malware it is and maybe like what threat groups it's associated with and the like.
Yeah. And so when people hear about malware and viruses and these bad things, they hear about it all the time, right? And you mentioned groups as well. So, you like APTs, advanced persistent threat groups that are usually affiliated with a lot of this proliferation of malware. But when we're talking about malware, this is very dangerous stuff because it's supposed to be harmful to systems and computers and networks and etc. What are the type of tools like? I mean, obviously you're not just like plugging in just a regular laptop. I mean, is there special software tools that are used to handle and to do this like forensic analysis?
Yeah, Yeah, generally you're creating like a lab environment, just like, imagine if you were studying an actual virus or bacteria, right? They isolate themselves and they put on all the protective gloves and
Yeah,
masks
yeah.
and nonsense, like it's kind of the same thing, except you do it in a sort of, on your computer. So general practice, like if you were going to do this on your own, you would get some kind of virtualization software, stand up a virtual machine, and you would put your analysis tools in that, and you would drop the malware in it. And then when you're handling the malware, any place is going to touch disk, you want to make sure it's like zipped and encrypted and neutered. So if you were going to like, let's say you went to something like VirusTotal or VirusShare, normally when you download a sample from those websites, they're going to give you the option to zip and encrypt it with a password. So then you do that and transfer it over to your VM. Alternatively, you could give your VM internet access, go log into the sites, download it, and then cut the internet access to your VM and then start the analysis. Generally, that's what you do so you don't infect your own system.
Mhm.
In the Every organization kind of has their own way of doing that. I've been in orgs where they're like, just use VMware, and that's enough isolation for them. I've been in organizations that were like, no, like they were scared that the malware is going to jump out of the screen and slice you. So they were like, no, you have to have a whole separate laptop that you move things over manually. And I've also worked at organizations where they stand up a server with, basically a virtualized server, or sorry, a server with a virtualized environment full of VMs that you can just log into and pick the VM you want and analyze it. So it just sort of depends on the org's security requirements, I guess.
So let's say someone is listening to this right now is like, this sounds amazing. I really want to start playing around with this. Is there an open source tool? Because I always like to recommend, low cost to no cost first for people because who wants to spend money out, when they're starting out learning. But what would be a website, a tool, or application someone can use that might be more user friendly from an entry level perspective that you would recommend that people can, hey, you could download this, it's pretty user friendly and it will step you through, or is there a site that you would recommend where they can get information to start working with open source tools?
Hmm. Malware, if I'm honest, malware analysis isn't the best at the instruction side, especially in the free areas, like even the blogs. There are some folks that have made some courseware that lasts a little bit and it quickly ages out because of how fast things are. So let me just start with the tools and then maybe we get to like the
Yeah.
how you learn. The tools are going to be easier now, especially now. So in terms of your virtualization software, what you want is something to run virtual machines. So the VirtualBox has been free forever, and that's open source. You also have KVM, again, Linux-based. That's
Hmm.
free forever. Broadcom made VMware Fusion and regular VMware free. So that's a really good place to start too. Um, a lot of places, especially training courses, still use VMware, so that might be a good one. Just to, for example, if you do a SANS course, a lot of times you're going to get a VMware VM,
Hmm.
so it might be helpful just to have VMware set up. Then you're going to want a Windows VM. Sometimes you can get trial copies of Windows that work good enough. You can pay for a license, however you want to do that. That's fine. There's also like Linux malware, so you could also learn how to do this on Linux and do it completely free. Um, for beginners, you want to be able to run the malware though, so it'd be really helpful if you had a Windows VM. It's just going to be a lot easier
Yeah.
for you starting out. So that's the first bit. The second bit is that you want to be able to look at the code. And this is where we start running into some hangups. None of the reverse engineering tools I would call user friendly.
Yeah.
That's just unfortunately the way it is. They
Yeah.
all have somewhat of a learning curve.
Hmm.
You know how sometimes you get a new application, and you open it up and it's like, here's how you do X, and it like points you to whatever. The reverse engineering tools don't really do that. You open
Yeah.
it up and they're just like, good luck, man. We expect you to know what's up. Now, there are a free one. The NSA open sourced this tool called Ghidra,
Hmm.
I want to say 5 or 6 years ago now,
Yep.
that they've been working on for decades. They finally open sourced. So you can go to their GitHub, I think,
Hmm.
and pull it. There's also various what are they called? Package repositories like Homebrew and Chocolatey and all these things have packages where you can just like basically just command line install Ghidra now. You're usually going to have to install a Java dependency with it to make it work. It's more of a point and click tool, but it's free and it is. I'm not going to say it's functionally equivalent, but it's good enough compared to the the software packages, the reverse engineering tools that you would pay for.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, I don't personally like it for my day-to-day, more in terms of the control flow of certain things. It's very clicky, but that's actually really good for beginners to be able to right click and see what's up and whatever. Whereas some of the other tools rely more on like keyboard shortcuts, and it's not as accessible to figure out what you can do, right? What are my
Mhm.
options? Ghidra lays that out a little bit easier for beginners, so I think in that sense it's really good. Um, Now, when it comes to actually learning how to do reverse engineering, this is where things vary wildly. You
Okay.
know, I learned from random like hacker websites like Toots for You and all these kinds of things that were around. And I actually was lucky in that my college, I was around for the very first reverse engineering class that they ever taught. And so they walked me through a lot of that stuff. So I actually, at least in I'm going to say my generation, I was one of the first to have like an academic kind of entry into reverse engineering. Most of my friends didn't do that. They just learned from online tutorials and from their buddies and
Hmm.
whatever. So I think you're if you can get it, try to find some free courses online. What I like right now is Josh Stroshin or Stroshine. I might be butchering his name. He worked at Mandiant or at Flare, and he has courses on Pluralsight. And Pluralsight's like maybe like a $10 or $20 a month thing
Very
where
low cost.
he walks you through reverse engineering with Ghidra. And he has a bunch of videos on YouTube that are free about doing reverse engineering with Ghidra. I think that's probably your best place to start
I
these
love it.
days, in terms of like just getting oriented. And then there are a lot of books that you could go look at that maybe we can talk about later,
Yeah.
if we want to get into books. But a lot of the books kind of age out. They're a little bit old, but once you have a good enough understanding, you can kind of take the knowledge from that and apply it to what we're doing now.
Wonderful. And if you do have that link to that YouTube channel, make sure I get that. And folks, I'll save you the Google search. It'll be in the description below. So
Yeah,
let's
absolutely.
talk about your current role and a little bit about what the company that you work for does, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I'm a malware analyst for Dragos. Dragos does cybersecurity or industrial control system cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity, just sort of depends on who you're talking to, what terms you use. But generally what that means is that we do cybersecurity for critical infrastructure companies, providers. These are going to be your electric companies, your power generation companies, oil and gas drilling, food and beverage manufacturing, automotive, these kinds of things. So we have a product that we put into a network, but we're not putting into a regular IT network. We put it on the OT network. So this is going to be the network where the actual machines are that do all the stuff, right?
Hmm.
If you ever remember that TV show like How It's Made,
Hmm.
they'll have like
Yeah.
a bottling of beer or something, right? And all the bottles are on a conveyor belt. Well, something controls how fast that conveyor belt moves,
Hmm.
right? And when it stops and all these things. Those things are called PLCs. They control sort of the physics of the situation. And so what our tool does is it sits on that network and it monitors communications to and from those PLCs inside and outside of that network to spot malicious behavior. And so that's sort of our bread and butter. And then we have other services, sort of around that. So we have a services division that does incident response and forensics and these kinds of things to respond to cases inside of those kinds of networks. And then we have a threat intelligence team, which is where I work, that works on sort of the threat groups, the kinds of folks that are trying to attack these networks. And we try to find new threats to critical infrastructure. We look for malware that affects critical infrastructure, deconstruct it. And then we have a product where we basically write reports for our customers so that they can stay aware of the sort of current, I guess, threat landscape.
Hmm. So earlier you mentioned, industrial security controls and ICS, and a lot of folks, we hear about this from our politicians in the news from time to time about our threats to like our water supply, our power grid systems, and so forth, and just our manufacturing industry, right, or petrochemicals industries, where all of these PLCs is programmable logic controllers that
Mhm.
feed information, monitor. It could be anything from temperatures. So I worked at a chemical facility years and years ago, DuPont Dow in Louisiana,
Mm.
in La Place, Louisiana.
There you go.
So worked down there, and so these things are very critical. And so in the Honeywell systems on that installation, they had like these sensors that monitor temperature to like so many, like I forget how many decimal places of beyond the zero that they would have to.
Mhm.
And it's critical because any kind of fluctuations to those levels meant something, right, to the different
Hmm.
engineers that monitor it. So having all this information, whether it's temperature gauge, pressure readouts, or just anything controlling something, and these PLCs can do things from just an on-off switch equivalent to a lot of complex functions that people don't really
Yep.
think about. It's just like when you think about a car where, there's so many computer chips that, and I forget the term, I think it's called MCU. Um, It'll come to me in a minute, but there's all of the
Mhm.
chips that are in all Internet of Things, whether it's a car, an air fryer, etc. And people don't understand that without proper security, these things can be compromised. They can be taken over. There's things like default secure. For example, the device could lock out or go into an off setting, but that can cause a domino effect and ripple effect depending on the complexity and how systems are arranged and set up. So, like for a
Hmm.
chemical facility, for example, if one system stops performing as it should or as expected, it could trigger where they have to make the decision to do a shutdown. And shutdowns aren't as simple as hitting an on-off switch. For like a chemical process, it could take, hours to days to do a full shutdown. And even in the process of and after can cost hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue, or even worse, could cause loss of life. So when people do
Hmm.
have these concerns about ICS SCADA and OT networks, these concerns that never went away because they grow. Because what do we want to do? We want to make things easy. The easy button is, oh, let's take our IT network and connect it over to here so that we can monitor it. And I love that your business, the Dragos business, is actually staying on this side, staying embedded. Because the closer you can get to the source of where the data is or where the devices are, that is essentially wire speed. When we talk about terms of a response, you mentioned incident response or
Hmm.
monitoring, you want to be as near wire, as close to the actual impacted device or endpoint as possible. And I love that the company is focused there. When you talk about doing the threat intelligence side and the work that you do, and you talk about developing, papers and reports and so forth, there's a
Hmm.
lot of talk about threat intelligence these days where you talk about plugging into systems like MITRE ATT&CK or other similar based systems. How often do you interface with like entities like MITRE or other government, even government agencies in your day to day?
The so MITRE ATT&CK for ICS came out, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, because one of my coworkers helped in the development of that. And I think he went to work for MITRE for a while, and I pitched in just a little bit. Um, just in terms of like general feedback with him. I don't think I'm an official reference for that, but I remember when they were building that out. And so, I think I'm in the MITRE ATT&CK Slack too, that I kind of lurk in as well. And so we do interface so that we use it in that a lot of our reports include attack for ICS, TTPs and things that they need. In terms of our general, we have to cooperate with government. You can't deal with critical infrastructure and not have some relationships with
Hmm.
governments like worldwide.
Yeah.
It's not just, the United States government, because we work in the United States. There's a lot of advisories. Our CEO has testified in front of Congress on some of these problems. But for example, in 2022, we discovered this, or we released a report on this toolkit that we discovered in collaboration with some of our partners, or I guess technically the appropriate way to say that would be released in collaboration with our partners, as a malware called Pipe Dream that had three different ICS sort of capable pieces of malware that could do all kinds of things, from DOSing equipment to downloading logic, manipulating the devices, crashing them, whatever. Um, that was a big enough deal that we got contacted by like the Japanese government asking for information, and I think I want to say maybe even the French government reached out at one point. This stuff, this like what you were talking about, this critical infrastructure stuff is scary,
Yeah.
right? People get maybe, worked up for good reasons, right? If you think of any industrial accident and the repercussions that happen because of industrial, that's like the worst case possible
Yeah.
scenario. You think about something like
Physical
the
destruction.
Bhopal disaster or whatever. Um, I'm not saying that the cyber attacks and things that we've seen so far are reaching that level, but that's what we're worried about, right? We know what the worst looks like because we have these industrial accidents for it. And because of that, and because, one of government's primary aims is just to protect its population, like they want to know everything about that, right? And so
Mhm.
whenever we discover a piece of malware, um, or I guess what I should say is that we try to foster a helpful relationship with world governments, because Dragos and the company in particular really only focuses on defending like civilian populations. Like we only do sort of civilian critical infrastructure protection. Like we're not going into like military bases or anything like that, right?
Hmm.
We're not trying to protect, you know, I don't know, some military bases power infrastructure or something, right? That's on the military to protect the military stuff. So we're mostly we're all civilian, and so that makes it really easy to collaborate with governments, right? Because we're not really associated with any kind of, military or anything like that. I think it it's it's an interesting role because of that. It's like it's very meaningful work because of that, right? Like we know what we're doing. We're in these networks. We're protecting civilian population from these possibly horrible things, and so um, we've had a lot of good conversations with governments and advisory boards and these kinds of things about how best to approach this problem. And the other side of this is that there's only so many people that know about industrial control systems, And because of what Dragos is and when they started, they've done a really good job of collecting a lot of experts. And so, in that sense, we're a resource for some different organizations. Like, hey, like, what do y'all think about this? When something like Trisis came out, which is a safety system malware back in 2017, it was kind of one of those things where we were tipped off from a source to go look for this stuff, and we started analyzing it, and then they want to know like what we found out, right? Because there's only so many people that they can lean on for information about these kinds of things, and that's what's been really unique about working at Dragos is before that, I was teaching, I did some other things. It's really interesting being at a company where you have this collection of experts, and then like you really are like leaned on and people listen, and so you have to be careful and you have to make sure that you're measured in your guidance and your advice. There's this aspect that we haven't really talked about. We were talking about reverse engineering and malware analysis, the tools and how you learn it. There's this whole other aspect of malware analysis and threat intel that's just pure communication.
Hmm.
It's being able to communicate well to these people and understand what it is that they're interested in and understand what the impact of your words is going to be so that they don't go do something extreme because of your advice. You can't tell them that this malware is going to blow up a nuclear plant, right? Because they're going to freak out. We don't know the political, the sort of political or legal infrastructure. I don't even know what you call this. I'm going to say the political infrastructure around what happens if a cyber attack is successful. Is that an act of war or not?
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful about the words you use because you could accidentally cause some nonsense to happen. And so that's been a real big lesson for me. Not that I've like, stepped in and done anything bad, but realizing that and how important it is to everybody else involved. It 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 adds a little bit of weight to the work, I guess.
Yeah. You mentioned communication, and no matter what we're dealing with, whether it's cyber or business or any industry, communication is always king, right? And it's
Mhm.
crucial, right, to be able to communicate information appropriately. I've had a few other guests that we've talked about ICS SCADA and OT networks. Tony H, and for folks that know Tony, he's part of the Deepwater Horizon solution.
Mm.
And then, of course, Mike Holcomb is a big voice in the ICS control, security control world as
I
well.
love Mike. He's great.
Mike is amazing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that, obviously when we talk about physical destruction, that's the big scary monster that we all want to think about and visualize, right? But when it comes to these type of attacks, could you take us through what a typical, like a run of the mill, if I could even use that term, because like you said, the landscape's always changing, the approaches and the tactics and techniques could vary slightly. But what would be a typical, like, hey, I've seen this 100 times before, and type of malware that is focused on the OT networks?
I see. Yeah. So the malware that makes the news, right? Like what Dragos tracks is like ICS malware. I think we have 9 samples now that we
Hmm.
track as like legit ICS malware.
Yeah.
And those are the I don't want to call them top tier necessarily, but that's a very teeny percentage of like the kinds of threats. And when you think about orchestrating an attack with maybe precise effects, there's going to be a lot of steps that build up to that, which includes a lot of reconnaissance and things and getting into the network. So there's that class of attacks that we like to think about, right? When we talk about ICS SCADA, I think a lot of because especially people in the cybersecurity community, the notion is APTs, right?
Hmm.
And they're going to try to like the crash override attack in 2016, they're going to try to shut off the the transmission substation. They're going to try to cut power to this neighborhood or that neighborhood or the whole grid or whatever, depending on what level of hype you want to get at. That's one class of attack that happens rarely in terms of physical effects and it actually working out and having some success, intentional or not. We don't really have that many instances of that as an attack structure. So now, if that's the sort of top tier of the worst case scenario and you kind of come down one, now what we have is a lot of ransomware and ransomware attacking the IT networks of organizations. We don't have really any instances that I'm aware of, at least that I can think of off the top of my head, where the ransomware has actually infiltrated the OT network. But ransoming the IT network can have repercussions for the OT network. So if I remember correctly, Colonial Pipeline,
Yeah.
right? So that was a ransomware attack, and that shut down the whole pipe, right? So Colonial Pipeline, it translates all kinds of product all across the East Coast down into around Florida or whatever and back, right? It's a huge pipeline, generates tons of money, and they have all kinds of products that go into this pipeline they're transporting. They need to be able to know what product is where and where it gets out of the pipe, right? So that they can bill appropriately. And just to know where the stuff is, right? There's the billing aspect
Yep.
of it, but also knowing what's where and. So if the IT system is a system that's connected, that does all that, that does the monitoring and has all of that knowledge, and you ransom that, now they don't have any visibility,
Yep.
right? Um, and so now they can't do their operation. They had to shut down the pipe. Now, I think really what happened, I don't remember the exact details for Colonial Pipeline. I think it was more like they ransomed the IT and they were worried that because of the ransomware in the IT network, that visibility would be hampered. And they said, we need to cut the switch and let's see what's going on. And it was more of a proactive, we need to cut this just in case, less than, those systems had actually been ransomed and caused a problem. I don't recall that it had gotten that far. So there's a lot of ransomware happening. There was I think a steel company in Norway. I mean, they're all over the place. I think Locker Goga was a big one for a minute, and then Ekins, I remember targeted some automotive companies and other ones. So that got real big in the not just in the industrial space, but ransomware in general got big, attacking a lot of industries that maybe we
Yep.
hadn't seen before. I think MedStar got ransomed, a lot of medical insurance and these kinds of things that were, I mean, honestly, just really horrible
It's kind of
in
like
my
what the
opinion.
SQL injection used to be back, several years ago when it was what was the group called? Lulsec was doing a rinse and repeat drive-by SQL injections on all these websites and so forth, and they got almost everybody. I think there was one
Yeah.
particular weekend they got over 100 plus organizations and businesses. But it seems that that was the hot thing back then, and now ransomware. Because obviously cybercrime, right? People want to make as much money as they can, so they're just out there, seeing what networks they can get in, how many systems they can compromise, and so forth. So ransomware has been pretty much of the flavor of cybercrime for the past several years. But are you seeing anything new and emerging that you're beginning to maybe see, hey, this could be a new change or shift in that approach?
Well, the ransomware is the next level where there's like malware really involved. The next big thing after that that's become prolific, but is again like maybe arguably requires less skill level is all the hacktivism that's happening. Right? That's kind of been the biggest trend change over the past 2025. I'm going to say like 2-ish years, 3-ish years, where the hacktivists had realized like a lot of these OT networks might have like remote access in some way that's exposed, that they could guess a password, default password, do some scanning, and just kind of log in and start just hitting buttons, right? Take a screenshot.
Yeah.
Here we go. I hacked whatever.
So I want to ask about the hacktivists. Obviously they're just trying to do these things for bragging rights. But is there, levels of hacktivists? Because like when I think of hacktivists, I think of also people akin to the people that go to like the art galleries and they toss the paint on these priceless works of art because they're, I think in those cases they're trying to talk about oil and companies and corporations that are mining and exploiting oil. But in your case, in the hacktivists, do you see like different variations, like where one's maybe a little bit more malicious, sinister than others?
Uh, the one division I can really think of is that some of these hacktivist groups, and you'll even see in some of it's not DHS, but like the U.S. government, they'll like indict folks that belong to these APTs and threat groups. And what you'll see is that some of the members of like, they I think a couple of years ago they indicted some folks that were affiliated with the IRGC, which is the Iranian military group. And it turned out that some of those guys had also been affiliated with like Cyber Avengers or something. And they put it in this indictment, you know? And so there's these hacktivist groups that are probably just covers for government, other governments in some way, or there's some weird cross-pollination, and
Yeah.
there's that, and then there's maybe some other hacktivist groups that maybe aren't as affiliated. What I'm going to say is I'm not really a threat hunter, right? I'm a malware analyst,
Yeah.
but I will say that that landscape is so murky, and when I talk to the threat hunters about it, I'm just like, I have no idea. And so as far as I can tell, there are the groups that seem to be affiliated with some kind of military cause, or maybe are even military backed in some way. And then maybe perhaps there are groups that aren't as much, but might be just politically motivated for, whatever reason.
Yeah. And since we just mentioned threat intelligence, folks, I had a wonderful interview. If you check out the other podcast episodes, Tammy Harper from Flare.io, phenomenal person in the threat hunting and threat intelligence. If you want to check that episode out. Um, Jimmy, we could talk for hours and hours, and again, I could pick your brain on so many cases, but I do
Mhm.
want to respect your time. So I want to kind of go into some of my favorite questions. My favorite question that I ask all of my guests is, could you take us through your story of your day one when you decided, hey, I want to learn malware and I want to learn how it works, and this is the career path I want to take. Is there a day one story that you could share with us?
Uh, I think it's less exciting and maybe less. I'm almost hesitant to share it because it's not as motivating as maybe I'd like it to
No,
be.
but I mean,
Um,
everybody has a day one story, right?
Yeah, it's less about security and more about computer science.
Okay.
When I was going into college, it was very much understood that I was not going to get any help from my parents. Like if I didn't get a full scholarship or get it paid for by in some way, that it wasn't going to happen. And I applied to this school to UNO and I got a full scholarship. And I applied to LSU and I had like 1 point less than I needed to get a full scholarship at LSU. So they were going to pay like, I don't know, 80% or something. I forget what it was. And I was still like, well, I'm going to go for the completely free option.
Yes.
And so I was going to pick a major and I was going to go study like jazz and philosophy. Like I wasn't even going to do
Jazz and
computer stuff.
philosophy, I like it.
Yeah, and my mom or my parents, my dad maybe, said something like, you're pretty good at that computer stuff. I had an aunt that had taught me how to build computers,
Hmm.
had taught me how to use like Linux and some of these things.
Hmm.
And I hadn't really thought about that much as a career path, more as like a hobby. It was like a video game thing to me.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's how I learned how to, play my
For me,
games
it
or
was the
whatever.
same way. I was building computers so I could play Quake and Descent and all of these
Yeah,
yeah.
it was
Doom.
that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so he mentioned that, and I was like, oh, maybe that is a good idea. And I talked to some folks in high school, and they said, no, University of New Orleans actually has a very good computer science
You
program. You should
know.
look into that.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going into the computer science program there. Now, my first year, Katrina hit New Orleans,
Oh.
and everything went to
Oof.
crap. And I was gone for a semester. I come back. Um, I studied at SLU for that semester, and then we went back to school. And now I'm like, well, this is probably going to end up being a career where I can make some money. At the same time, the NSA and the Department of Defense, they started doing those scholarship programs like Scholarship for Service and IASP. And I applied for one of those programs because it would give me money and a stipend and pay for like grad school and stuff. But because of that, there were requirements to study certain cybersecurity topics. And I went, okay, whatever, that's what I'll do. Um, And so I took a malware analysis class. It was part of the curriculum. I needed certain credits,
Hmm.
and I hated it. I hated it. I thought it was the worst thing. The professor was really good. He's still a professor. I forget exactly what his title is, but he runs a lot of the cybersecurity curriculum over at LSU now. And I still go down there and I talk like every year and hang out with him. And he printed out malware, the assembly code for malware on a piece of paper, and we had to hand annotate it, until near the end of the class where he let us use like IDA Pro, like professional reverse
Yeah.
engineering software to get through things. And I remember thinking it was the worst thing ever. So fast forward a little bit later, I'm trying to get a job and I have my resume on LinkedIn, and a defense contractor sees it and says, "Hey, we see you know how to do this reverse engineering stuff. Um, would you would you want to interview with us to do this?" And this is still post Katrina New Orleans. Like aside from that opportunity and getting the stipend with my scholarship, I was, remediating mold out of houses. I was doing basically landscaping, cutting grass, that kind of thing. I didn't have a real job, really. I was, playing pool for $5 or $10. Like it was like stuff like that, just like wherever I could get, some money for whatever. And so I think I also had like maybe a research position at the university that was paying me some hourly rate. Like wherever I could scrounge up coin, basically, I
Uh-huh.
was going for it. And so I just kind of looked at it and said, wow, well, money, like a salary sounds way better than this. Like, let me give it a shot. And so it wasn't until I started doing it where I just had to, right? You're at your desk, you got to start doing it. And I was using the real tools and kind of putting it together that like after like a few months of it, I was like, oh, I actually like this. Like doing it. But man, going in, it was really just like, I really need a job. I need some money. And I don't want to say it's Stockholm syndrome because it's like almost, what, 2012. It's 12 or 13 years later and I'm still doing malware analysis. So I
Uh-huh.
clearly like it now. But the beginning of it was a real rough patch for me. And it wasn't until I really got into to like it wasn't just, oh, you understand the assembly code. Once you got into really like how you create that mental map of how the malware works and then solving the problems with certain kinds of automations and these kinds of things, you can write scripts and you can do all these things to help you along where you really start to feel like you're solving a problem. And that's where it really got interesting for me and solving a problem in a way that I liked, right? Versus maybe doing like a forensics case or being a software developer. I knew after my first software development class I did not want to be a software developer, but yeah, basically it was just kind of I kind of fell into it because I was looking for a job and it worked out that I liked it and that I was good at it and I could find, meaningful ways to use it and, here we are.
What I love about your story is, you was kind of compelled to take it on, but once you started, once you were all in and committed to it, it's just became that career path, and look at where you are today, and the industry is better off with you in it,
Oh,
doing what you
thanks.
do. So, good choice for all of us. Um, Obviously, with like 10 plus, what, 15 plus years of a career doing this work, you've had to have like leaders you looked up to, advisors, bosses, managers, mentors. I guess the goal of this question is, do you want to shine a light on some people that had a positive impact along your journey to this point?
Yeah, he's the chief product officer of Zona now. Um, I don't know if they're technically a competitor or not for Dragos, but they do operate in the ICS realm in some ways. But at the time, he was my first manager in this field, and he had to, I guess, like he interviewed me for my first job, and then he had to sort of vet me. They basically had like a malware analysis sort of certification program at that contractor before you could go sit with a client, and he
Mhm.
kind of ran me through that initial training and stuff. And he was really good about taking me along and kind of showing me what I needed to do to be professional. Like, he was my first real, professional entry into the field. And then later he hired me at a different job to do teaching and some research
Okay.
and stuff. And so I worked for him twice. So his name is Raid Al-Liwi. Again, he's over at Zona now. And so he really helped me out a lot. Um, Dr. Golden Richard, who taught me how to do this originally, and we still keep in touch and whatever. He wrote Scalpel, which is like a big forensics file carver, and now he works over at LSU doing the cybersecurity education. He hosts a speaker series there that I speak at, and a bunch of bigwigs in the industry speak at. And then in the reverse engineering and sort of malware analysis field, Rolf Rolls, who's like a big reverse engineering researcher. I think he worked at Hexrace for a minute. He was just really so like I spent a lot of time just doing things really privately, and it wasn't until I joined Dragos that I became very public and I was really speaking, a lot. So I took some of his training classes, and I met him at the reverse engineering conference, like Recon in Montreal. And he was just like really good to me, like just really good advice. He was really friendly. He like answered my questions, and he was really supportive. Even as I was speaking, and not that I want to get into this now, but some drama with like potential plagiarism and some other things that happened. That he was just very helpful in helping me navigate some of those things and just good at answering questions about reverse engineering things that I wasn't finding online. It's like, how do I deal with this weird C++ problem? Like maybe Rolf knows about it. And
Hmm.
he was open to letting me talk to him. So that was really cool. And then on the ICS side, like doing ICS cybersecurity is there's so many places you have to put your hands, so many
Hmm.
things you have to learn. On the ICS side, I mean, the CEO, Rob Lee, I started at Dragos
Oh
when we
yeah.
were like 25 people. So, Rob was one of the guys that really like oriented me to industrial control systems and how all of that stuff works in a big way. Joe Slowick was there at the time. He's a big threat hunter. Again, another person that really got me kind of in the mix and taught me a lot about how this stuff works. And then Sergio Caltagirone, who taught me a lot about threat intel at Dragos because he was running the intel program then. And so I think those were really cool. And then on the just general management side, for the longest time, Kate Johnson was my boss for a long time at Dragos, and she was just really good to me. Helped me navigate lots of things, being supportive of a lot of these big cases like the pipe dreams and stuff of the world that I had to work on. So yeah, there are a lot of folks, man. You don't get anywhere without a little bit of help,
Oh yes, and I
and
love
like I
that
could.
these people are important, And when I tell people that are looking to get into the industry, connect with the experts, connect with people that you're reading the articles about that are leading the forefront, because these are some of the most down to earth people that want to educate, want to inform, and want to help out. One of the beautiful things I love about the cybersecurity industry and all the various facets and domains of it is there's full of great people that just want to help other people out. There goes my little blanket over my boxes in the back there.
But we
But
we we learn more too, though. I feel like in my generation coming up, and you might remember this too, because you know, this honestly, the field used to be a little meaner, you know?
yes.
And I think a lot of people like me that came up in that environment didn't like it.
Mhm.
And so a lot of folks my age, your 30s, early 40s, maybe even into the 50s have learned from that. And
Mhm.
people are just a lot nicer now.
Oh
If
yeah, it
someone
used to be
messages
the
you and asks
knowledge
you
is
for help,
power. Like people would
yeah,
hoard knowledge as if, oh, I'm
yeah,
holier than
yeah.
thou. No, that's the wrong place to be. Knowledge should be empowering. You should empower. You should
Hmm.
want all your colleagues, your teammates, everybody around you to be as knowledgeable as you are, because that means there's more people that can, row the boat, and more, two people can move a couch really fast, and so
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely, man. And so it's yeah, definitely reach out, man. Like, I yeah, I love answering questions and stuff like that. And so especially at conferences and things, like it's always great when folks walk up to you, say hi, ask you questions. We all want to talk about the things that we love, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like talking to someone about their favorite movie or whatever, you geek out on it, It's the same thing with this kind of stuff. People don't get into stuff like this without really liking it. So,
Yes.
yeah.
So this next part of my questions, and we're running a little long, so I hope we're
Oh, we're
okay
good,
on
no
time for
problem.
you. So this next set of questions is kind of my moment of levity. We've been talking to tech and talking shop for a minute, so I just want to
Hmm.
take a little break. So my moment of levity is just some rapid fire questions where I'm just going to hit you with some speed round of questions. First answer pops in your head, just say it out loud. There's no right
Okay.
or wrong answer. So if you'll humor me, I'm gonna hit you with some rapid fire questions.
All right. I'm an analyst, right? I'm gonna try my best.
All right.
I don't think I do anything fast, but
All
okay.
right. Right off the jump, cake or pie?
Pie,
Pie. What kind of pie?
key lime,
Cold or hot key lime pie? There's only really one way to have it, right?
old. Yeah,
Cold.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. This was going to split the room for all IT people. So Star Wars or Star Trek?
God, I hate to say this, but neither.
Neither. Okay. Hey, I've
I'm
had
not a
several
big
good
fan of either, but if you were like, dude, you had to pick one, I'd probably pick Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Laser swords are cool.
Which series of films for Star Wars though? That matters.
Oh, so I was lucky enough that when I was a kid, they they did the special edition of the original trilogy and they
Mhm.
re-released those in theaters. And I only remember it because I remember someone gave us a box set as kids and it was like all gold. But we got to
Mhm.
see Star Wars in theaters,
In
which
theaters.
is really crazy to me because, up until that point, I'd never really seen anything like that.
Mhm.
Just like, the special effects, even then, even in the 90s, you were still like, whoa. And so, yeah, probably the original trilogy for sure.
Original
Yeah.
OT. Okay. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No.
No. There you have it. What has been your most favorite book of all time you've read, and what was the last book that you've read?
All right. Okay, we're gonna start with the last book I read because that one's easier. I know we talked a little bit about this before. I read all the time, and when I was prepping for this, I actually went and looked at my and I think I might have read like 60 odd books this year already.
Wow,
And so
impressive.
there's just a lot of it's my one of my main hobbies is just reading. I love it. You know. I think you mentioned at one point being like a consummate learner. That's how I learn. I've always learned through reading, and I love
Awesome.
it. So but the thing I've been digging recently are the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons.
Hmm.
The first book is called, I think, Hyperion, and the second book is The Fall of Hyperion. And then it fast forwards like 300 or 400 or 500 years, and then there's Endymion, and then the rise of Endymion. So I just finished Endymion. I just bought the last book, so I'm about to start reading the last book. I'm really excited about that. And that's a really cool, like sci-fi universe with like horror elements. The first book is told like the Canterbury Tales, where the characters are on a pilgrimage to go visit the Shrike Temple. And as they're traveling, each of them tells a story about why they're going to visit the Shrike Temple and what they're going to ask of the Shrike, which is this supposedly mythical being that turns out to be real. It's not really much of a spoiler. I think he's on the cover of the book. But he's like this nasty creature with like knives coming out of everywhere, and he'll like behead people and he like pins them onto this crazy spike. Like it's really like horror filled while being sci-fi. But it also has some interesting like political aspects that remind me of Dune.
Yeah. A
And
lot
so
of
that's
folks do
been a
mention it's
really
similar to
excellent
Doom.
read that's like really surprised me, honestly. And what I really like about what he does is that Dan Simmons is really good about balancing the perspective, the narrative perspectives of things. The story's being told by someone in that universe always, and the way he does that in every book, I really appreciate. And so those are surprisingly good books that I was not expecting to encounter this year that I really loved. Um, in terms of my favorite book, I the honest answer there is I really don't have one. And I could split this a
Okay.
couple ways. What I will say is that in the fantasy realm, as a kid, I loved Lord of the Rings. I mean, and the first time I ever heard Lord of the Rings was I called her my aunt, even though she was just like my mom's really good friend. My mom had to go do something in an office, and I was in the van with her friend, and she just told me the story of The Hobbit, just like verbally, like just recited the whole thing to me.
Wow.
And then gave me a copy of the book, and I started reading those. Loved those books as a kid.
Now, is this the
Um,
same ant that showed you how to like build
a
computers? Because I
different
mentioned
aunt. I had some great
different.
women in my life.
No worries.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And so now as I'm older, what I want to split this two ways. In the fantasy realm, I love Discworld. Just all of Discworld and Terry Pratchett. I just think it's amazing. It's funny, satire, it's good fantasy, it's good storytelling. All of it's just amazing. Probably some of my favorite things as an adult. But what I will say, things that have like just changed me, right? Like The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk about like the interplay between like trauma and your brain and like physical feelings in your body and how those encounter like that kind of stuff like really changed my perspective on so much. You know, having gone through something like Hurricane Katrina and then just
Yeah.
other things in my life, reading a book like that is, I don't know, it's really, really cool. And I highly recommend reading something like that. I kind of consider it a sequel. There's another book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate where he covers similar aspects of things, and I kind of relate both of them as kind of the same kind of book. But both of those are excellent books to read.
Excellent. Well, if you can give me all of those links, I will make sure
Yeah,
they're in
yeah,
the
man. I'll try to
description
remember what I
below.
said. Lord of the
So,
Rings, Discworld, right? Body Keeps the
Hyperion,
Score, Myth of Normal. I can get you all
yeah,
four of those. Yeah.
awesome. You mentioned already earlier about some conferences you've spoken at, and so what is in your near future in 2026 here? What are some events and conferences that we can expect to see you at?
Um, I don't have the only thing I have upcoming. I'll be at B-Sides ICS in Miami, and then I'm speaking at S4 Miami. So that's going to be at the end of February. The work there, it's really cool. If you go on my LinkedIn, I think I wrote a little blurb on it, but basically I've spent the past couple months prompting LLMs to help me build a particular kind of ICS malware. So I know that we're kind of running up on time, but the basic thing here is that there's ICS malware that can like download code and it like really messes with the PLC. Like it runs code on the PLC and that's kind of how it affects things. That's going to be your stuff like your Stuxnets and your
Hmm.
like Trisis. But then there was a kind of malware that primarily operates through sending the messages, meaning, we'll send a message and say, turn that breaker off. And then the PLC receives the message and goes, yes, I'll turn that breaker off. And I kind of think of those as ICS protocol malware. The most
Mhm.
recent case was Frosty Goop, which cut heat to a bunch of apartment buildings in Ukraine at the beginning of 2000, end of 2022, I think. I hope I have that date right. And so I looked at that and thought, well, all Frosty Goop did was put a command line layer on top of an open source library for speaking this ICS protocol. And I was like, I wonder if an AI tool can help me build that really quickly. And so I started working on that. I tried to recreate Frosty Goop. Then I switched over to another protocol that's used in the electric sector, DNP3, in a lot of North America, and other industries, but mostly the electric sector was what I was thinking about. And then
Mhm.
tried to get it to build me malware, build a tool using that. And so the conference presentation is just about that experience. What did I learn? How long did it take? I had two coworkers that were actually building something very similar, but they just did it on their own,
Mhm.
and comparing the time that takes and the like. And so that's kind of the topic that I'm exploring for us for. It should be a good talk. I'm really excited to share it with people.
Wow. Wow. So a lot of the professionals, in our day lives, we're super busy, right? And we also have, the
Mm,
events and conferences, and some of us are writing publications, books, research papers, etc. But a lot of us try to make time for causes and nonprofits, volunteer work, charities, etc., that are near and dear to our heart or has an impact in our lives as overall. Like for myself, I donate to a lot of reading focused charities, and like for example, St. Jude's Cancer Research Hospital in Tennessee
mm.
for myself. So I usually ask my guests, what are some causes that are near dear to your heart that you like to shine a light on that that are doing great work in the world?
Huh. You know, this is, I don't want this to make me sound mean, because it's not. I find my work at Dragos and in this field to be so meaningful that I'm not, that most of the time when I'm done working, I almost have to take more time for myself. And so when I think about, not that I don't like charities, there's plenty of good charities around. Um, but I'm not as active a participant in maybe some charitable causes around the city. Although that's something I think about more and more often, like being active in the community and stuff. And so I don't really have one offhand. I know some of the problems that I try to pay attention to when I'm looking at like donating my own money. Um, Anything that combats homelessness. I think that the homelessness problem in America is just like a travesty that we have people, especially around this time of year when it's cold and
Mhm.
that is one that I try to pay attention to, news about it, solutions to it, like the project they did out in Salt Lake City where they just like built homeless people homes. They just built them homes and said you can stay, like those kinds of things I think are amazing. And then on the other hand, when it comes to the things in the sort of maybe the medical sector, dementia related charities, the
Mhm.
Alzheimer's and these kinds of things, just because I've had several relatives pass away from those kinds of diseases. I think those are really important to pay attention to, but there isn't one that I'm particularly like active with or supportive with. And a lot of that is maybe like time and just having the energy for it. I feel
No
like
worries.
I give a lot to my work, doing this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. So, is there a resource? So, besides your LinkedIn, is there websites, blogs, or things that people can connect with you on? Follow you. Is there? I guess it's more of a shout out for your socials if you have any that you're willing to share.
Yeah, I think for the most part, the Dragos website and the Dragos blog is probably, where you'll see a lot of either my work or just my coworkers' work in general. Um, I don't really have a website or a blog. I go back and forth about starting one, and the reason I haven't is that I can't figure out a new enough take on teaching reverse engineering. And until I have one that I think is actually like that's what I want to talk about, aside from maybe just talking about my experiences in the ICS field. I've thought about maybe just doing that,
Hmm.
but I really want to start something that's like a different kind of perspective on teaching and learning reverse engineering that we haven't seen yet, and I haven't quite wrapped my head around what that looks like yet. So I don't really have a personal website. The best way to follow me would be LinkedIn. I'm on Blue Sky. If you search my name or my handle, which is just mayahustle.com, I think is the handle on Blue Sky, or Mastodon, Maya Hustle at infosec.exchange. I'm there. Those are the easiest ways to follow me and keep in touch. I tend to post a lot of things on there about what I'm doing and research and those kinds of things. Um, yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting to the final part of the podcast. So this is something I do with all my guests recently, and not to put you on the spot because this is,
Yeah.
I don't think, something you're prepared for, but I like to give my guests the final word. Whether you want to talk about malware analysis, your company Dragos, events you got upcoming, anything. It could be just a random talk. It could be about your favorite book, a favorite character, a topic, political thing. It doesn't matter. The floor is
Mm.
yours.
Huh. I think what I would say is take care of yourself. It's like whatever that means to you. In my experience as someone who's also, we didn't really get into this, but who has dealt with like burnout in a field where I shouldn't be, I do, one of the things we talk about with combating burnout is like having meaningful work. It's like I have plenty of that and still manage to burn out. Even in a meaningful field, you can encounter burnout. And my solution to that is finding analog hobbies. Like I like to get together with my friends and play board games, and we do that once every couple of weeks. And we play new board games all the time, and we argue about game manuals and we critique the writing style of the board game manuals. I mean, we're the nerdiest people about it, but it's a hobby that lets me disconnect and remember why I'm doing the things and appreciate the relationships and the people around me. And so yeah, just take care of yourself, man. Like whatever that means is like do it. Yeah.
Well spoken. Thank you so much for being part of the Top Cyber Pro podcast. Jimmy, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, man, this is great. Thanks so much for having me on here.
My pleasure.